Hi, everyone, and welcome to Cloud Native and Coffee from Mirantis, conversations with cloud native experts from around the community and around the world. I'm John Jainschigg, Director of Open Source Initiatives at Mirantis. With me is Shaun O'Meara, Global Field CTO, and today we are joined by iconic, I'm not sure he would like to be called iconic, but that was the first word that occurred to me, cloud journalist Stephen J. Vaughan-Nichols, who, in his own words, has been writing about technology and the business of technology since CPM-80 was the cutting-edge PC operating system, 300 BBS was a fast internet connection, WordStar was the state-of-the-art word processor, and we liked it. Or some of us liked it, some of us preferred XY right?
A few.
Stephen was co-founder and co-leader of the Internet Press Guild at netpress.org. In 22, the Trade Association and Business Publications International awarded him its gold medal for top e-newsletter for the Computer World Business Critical newsletter. And Analytica listed Stephen as a 2017 top 25 cloud and open source influencer, a 2020 top 100 cloud influencer, a top IoT 100 influencer, a 2021 top hybrid cloud influencer, and in 2022 he was listed in their who's who in cloud. Finally, in 2019, Information Management Today named Stephen the year's top cloud computing writer.
Yay.
But this is, just the latest pruned down version of your CV, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stephen J. Vaughan-Nichols helped launch and edit Linux Watch, Web Week, which became Internet World, Interactive Week. He's written for every important computer, internet, and cloud magazine and website in the universe. And you and I were actually distant colleagues for a while at CMP Media or United Business Media or one of those media. One of those companies. We did not know each other at the time, but we got paychecks from the same people.
Right.
It all blurs together in any case after a while. So our topic for today, and the way I lured Stephen into the room, is cloud native friction. Everything in cloud keeps evolving, but it's generation after generation of technologies and schools of best practice emerge around infrastructure, platforms, application building, operations, and all this stuff in generations overlaps and supplants one another over time. It feels to me like two things are happening, and I'm going to ask for, your feedback on this. One is that there does not seem to be a singular cloud technology anymore. People are having many different conversations about different things. Their problems are therefore different, or at least feel different, even, if they have commonalities. Cloud use cases are subdividing. People are viewing and describing their pains in different ways, even, and so that's making it harder to parse pain, if you want to think about it that way. So my first question is, how would you pigeonhole cloud problems today? How many boxes of pain can we identify?
An almost infinite number.
It's big, isn't it?
Yeah, it's big. There are some commonalities, though. I mean, a few years ago, there was a real fuss over what was going to be the container orchestration platform. And that fight did not last for very long. Kubernetes won out. So at least we have that in common. Or I could say we had that pain in common because, while Kubernetes is indeed very useful and it's really good, there are lots of different ways to consume Kubernetes. And it's just really difficult for a lot of people to get their minds around, which is why, some companies like Red Hat and Mirantis, go out of their ways to make life easier for Kubernetes users. But even when you make it easier for them, I don't think anyone would call Kubernetes easy. And it's still, particularly once you start getting into more advanced use cases, it gets quite complicated. And while it does enable you to do some very interesting things with it, because, for example, I think the only real hybrid clouds out there, in the sense of you can actually run workloads over 2 or more clouds simultaneously and have them interact. Kubernetes is the only way to pull that trick off without tearing your hair out, in my opinion. On the other hand, you are probably still going to tear your hair out. I mean, it can be done, though, which is more than I can say for many of the other platforms out there. So, but once you get past that commonality of Kubernetes, things get more complicated both beneath that layer and above it. For example, what containers are you going to use? I mean, yes, Docker is there, but there are other alternatives which each has their pluses and minuses. And above that, you have, other issues like what network fabric are you going to use? Well, that's a darn good question. How are you going to secure that? Now, that's a really involved question. And there are many answers to it. And as one IT disaster after another, like SolarWinds, have shown, we really have to take care of our software supply chains. And it all gets to be really complex. And particularly if you're looking for someone to do this for you. I mean, you need people who are developers. You need, as always, you need people who are, let's still call them system administrators. So their jobs have gotten much bigger and more complicated as time has gone by. You need your DevOps people. You need your security people. You need your network people who understand networking at a different kind of level than we've seen before. And so you've got all these balls in the air in this new mega platform that we call the cloud. And there's just lots of pain points out there. It's sort of like, I don't know, it's Thursday. What's our pain point today?
But Stephen, that's interesting. So if you're looking at Kubernetes right now, and I want to kind of narrow in on something you said, you alluded to this idea of above and below I'm going to call it above and below the horizon line.
Right.
We've got Kubernetes as an infrastructure tool, which is essentially that container runtime and an orchestrator. But everything that we do with Kubernetes, everything functional about Kubernetes sits above that. It actually is it's a container or a runtime running above that underlying platform.
Right.
And, there's one school of thought that says the underlying platform problem is solved. We'll come back to talking above the line in a second, but what do you think about that as a statement if we look at this from a pain point?
We're not there yet. We're really not. And also, actually, if anything, the platforms are getting more complicated. I mean, Windows is actually now, you can actually do serious things with Windows and Windows containers now on Kubernetes. Now, personally, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, but I know there's a lot of companies out there who are investing in the Windows containers universe, and using Kubernetes with Windows, which is a thing unto itself. And then you have all these different variety of Kubernetes where you have some people are integrating it with their operating system or with other platforms like, say, SUSE with, I'm blanking on the name of the company they recently acquired. Someone help me out here.
Rancher.
Yeah. Rancher, exactly. And you've got Red Hat, who is integrating it with their various programs. So you can very much still end up in a silo, as it were. You can end up in the Red Hat silo. You could end up with a SUSE silo, a canonical silo. Again, since Microsoft is now beginning to play a more important role here, you can no longer even really count on Unix, shush my mouth, Linux as the one commonality that you can count on.
That's an interesting point, though. I mean, you use this term platform, and that's one of my pet peeves. Recently, talking to different companies, and they refer to our platform. What does that mean? I mean, what is a platform at the end of the day when it comes to the underlying Kubernetes versus what we run on top of it?
Well, in this particular universe, when I think of platform, I'm actually thinking what's more of a stack.
Okay.
By that I mean I want the operating system, what variety of Kubernetes I'm running, what variety of container I'm running, and so on. Now that can be defined very much by the vendor that you work with. If you decided to go with all canonical, they'll be happy to give you a complete up and down the stack, as will SUSE, as will Red Hat, etc. And or of course you can always do it yourself, and which is difficult, but companies which have a lot of technical expertise and lots of chutzpah, because it takes a lot of courage to try that trick these days. You can, mix and match. But generally speaking, what I'm seeing are companies adopting one stack or the other, and for some reason they prefer to call it a platform, as you just referred to.
Yeah. It's always interesting to me, this whole idea of a platform, because we all have been used this term for as long as I can remember in the industry. But
right.
I think it's a great word, chutzpah. When you look at chutzpah and what it takes to run these platforms yourself. And the question which I always ask is, why is any company taking that pain on themselves to do that? And coming back to the topic of pain.
What I see are companies that are still thinking of technology in pre-cloud terms, or even really almost pre-virtualization terms. Deep in their hearts, they still think it's a server in our server room in our data center, and it's all very much, it's a physical thing. We have control of it. We need to control the horizontal. We need to control the vertical. And they don't realize just how nigh on to impossible it is to control all those different elements. I mean, you've got to have not just an enormous IT team to even try this trick. You have to have, as I referred to earlier, a lot of expertise in a lot of different areas. And as anyone out there who's tried to hire people with cloud expertise of one kind or another knows, there aren't that many people out there who are capable of pulling this off rather. And but still, there's this thought that we can do it, and I think for many of these companies, if they haven't discovered it yet, they soon will, because it's just. I mean, I like to think of myself as being technically pretty savvy, and I know a lot of really people who are much smarter than I am at actually administrating and programming and all this stuff. I wouldn't do this, even if you gave me an unlimited budget and said, go out there and do it. There might be some areas I'd want to have my control over, like security. I feel pretty comfortable with security stacks and that part. Okay, sure. But to do all of this on my own, even if you gave me an unlimited budget, I just, no. I'm going to go and partner with someone who I feel like I can trust, let them do the bulk of the heavy lifting. That's what I'm paying them the serious money for. And I'll just focus on what my business is good at. And because I'm a tech kind of person, I would also go ahead and focus myself on security or possibly networking.
I think that's an incredible point. I mean, ultimately, what are you as a business trying to achieve?
Right.
Focus. I mean, if I'm a widget manufacturer, I'm not in the business of being an IT provider. I need to focus on what it takes me to sell widgets, and that's a good point.
Yeah, exactly. And again, this earlier mindset, which is still out there, has some people again still thinking that, servers are the cloud is just a bunch of, what's the phrase? It's the cloud is just a bunch of somebody else's servers. Well, no, sorry, it's not. You may think that way, but it is not a useful analogy.
Yeah, it's the idea of cloud becoming ubiquitous compute rather than this individual servers that I'm leasing. And it is a big mind shift. I wonder if that's changing or just maybe not changing fast enough.
Not changing fast enough. is my thought on that. Again, I've been at this for a really long time. So I have trouble with it, and I make my living from running right on the bleeding edge of technology and looking over the other side and reporting on what I see. And even I still occasionally have trouble with with some of just the fundamental concepts, because they're not the concepts I used in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, or even the aughts for that matter.
I suppose it's even defining in the moment, what is cloud? What is a cloud?
Right.
And what your perception of that could be.
Yeah. Really, it tells you a lot, actually. It's when I talk to, I consult as well occasionally, and that's usually my opening question is, what do you think the cloud is? Followed by, what do you think it can or cannot do for you? And it's the answer to the first question is often very revealing as to whether or not a company, C-level people anyway, are actually ready for about what they're about to do, or try to do, I should say.
Not to put you on the spot, but what's the scariest answer you've heard to that question?
Oh, the scariest is it's just a bunch of servers. We won't have to change anything. We'll just lift all our applications, including the Cobalt on a mainframe. Just bring it over.
Yeah, sure.
Well, you want to talk to IBM about that before you try that? And they're going to tell you it's not that easy. Of course, you can't put mainframes on a cloud, but that's a very specialized area. Again, go talk to IBM if that's what you really want to do. But yeah, it's, I actually, and that's not only a scary answer, it's a surprisingly common answer. It's just, they think of it as just a way of really. They think of it as almost as just being a pure business change, a business change rather than technical. They think it's just a matter of, we're going to just pay for what we use rather than pay for the infrastructure.
Pay in a different way.
Pay in a different way. And, well, yes, but no. Again, that actually, you are going to change, but if you take that to the extreme, then you're... that is a very unfortunate analogy to try to revise your business IT plan around.
I.e., what is the problem you're trying to address? Sorry, John.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying, it's that question of, what is the problem you're actually trying to address?
Right. Exactly.
So continuing where I started off with our question, we spoke about, what's the platform, what's the underlying infrastructure, but one of the pain points that I'd like to understand is that what you're seeing out there is, for those companies, those forward-thinking individuals, I suppose, or organizations, that are not treating the cloud and cloud infrastructure as just another server, but treating, Kubernetes, and we're talking about the EKSs, the GKEs in the world,
right?
Just a runtime, for want of a better way of putting it, and then loading workload on top of that. What do you think the key pain points that they're experiencing where they don't manage that underlying infrastructure themselves?
Well, a number of things. One is, again, just moving workloads is an early one. Everyone has trouble with it. Yeah, it doesn't seem to matter how well you think you're doing that. You don't know it well enough until you actually have done it a time or two. Another thing, actually a term I just heard for the first time today is cloudflation. And that is that the hyper clouds of the world, the Azures, the AWS, the Google Cloud, and so on, they're expensive and they're getting more so. And a lot of companies, their initial reason to buying into the cloud was, this will be cheaper. It'll be easier. We won't have to pay we won't have to have as many in-house IT people, and it'll be cheaper. And they're discovering that not only, even if you do all the right things with your AWS to make sure that you don't have any idle VMs or idle containers, just sitting there burning up CPU, the prices are going up. And combined with the other economic problems we're having right now, they're they're getting a little, how to put it, they're upset that it costing them more than they thought it would, say, even 2-3 years ago. And they're trying to get their minds around, well, how can we really reduce our costs now? And which is, it's not easy. You can, of course, look to other cloud providers, but as anyone who's ever actually worked on pricing cloud services, it is not at all easy to determine what your real prices are and if you're using AWS Lambda, for example, well, what the heck does that really translate in forget about the technical side, just as far as dollars and cents are concerned, what does that really mean? And the answer is, well, hire a consultant and start working at it, because there is no quick, easy answer to determine that. And if you look at, say you wanted to shift to, say, a smaller regional player like, say, Akamai and Linode now, since those two have gotten together, and I see them playing an interesting role ahead. But can you take something that's from a hypercloud and then downsize it into something? I know at least a couple of companies are thinking about that sort of thing. And again, that's not an easy question to answer. And there are no easy answers for it. And these are not really technical issues, but they're business issues. And in a way, I guess that's sort of a good thing, because it shows that the cloud has gotten to a point now where there's enough acceptance of it out there that people are now thinking of it purely in terms of business and financial issues on some levels rather than technology. Now, of course, you can't pull them away from each other, but at least people are beginning to think in those lines anyway.
So,
yeah, I suppose it's driving back. Sorry, John.
No, I was just going to say, so arbitrage finally exists. I mean, people have been talking
Right.
about being
Yeah.
able to arbitrage the costs of one service versus another.
Yeah.
But it was always apples to oranges, at low level
right.
before, and maybe that's less true today than it has been in the past.
Certainly, that's how they're looking at it. Actually, arbitrage is exactly the right word. Thank you for bringing it up. And again, that's never would have thought of that 3 years ago. I mean, sure, people would say, well, when they initially have a buy-in, what costs more, what less, or occasionally a company will get badly burned, usually because they haven't really worked out how they were going to be using their cloud properly, and then they'll shift over. But in terms of, okay, we're paying X, surely we can do better. Let's look at the other options and decide if we could actually do better. That, on that sort of level, seems to me to be new. I think I'll write about that sometime soon, actually, the more I think about it.
But is that idea of arbitrage also maybe driving the repatriation, hard repatriation?
Right.
Because it is still pretty hard to do. Never mind just from a costing analysis point of view. Technology really isn't there yet. I mean,
Right.
we like to say, yes, okay, we can run, what runs on one Kubernetes will run on another, but that's not strictly true.
No.
In fact, it's completely false in many cases.
Right. Yeah, it would be low. I mean, to me, that's one of the great promises of Kubernetes. And I think that by, say, 2026, 2027, you probably will be able to do that, at least in some cases. But we're not there yet. It's still, again, way back at the beginning of the conversation, Kubernetes is much more complicated than anyone ever thinks it's going to be. And people usually go into it knowing it's not going to be easy. But nope, even if you think it's going to be hard, it's harder than you think it will be.
And that's
And
kind
then
of
that makes
story for life.
arbitrage impossible, right?
Not impossible, hard.
If you can't move workloads fluently from one platform to another, for example, because of differences in networking, because of inconsistencies in configuration of target Kubernetes clusters.
Well, again, it can be done, but it sure isn't easy.
But I think it also boils down to this idea of, if you're not building applications to take advantage of what what cloud actually means,
Right.
then it's going to end up being, to a certain extent, impossible.
Right.
If you don't build things on a microservices base and you take advantage of what modern app design means, truly means, versus what you mentioned earlier with this lift and shift model. I mean, if you lift and shift from on-prem to public cloud, it's going to cost you more, full stop.
Right.
Because you're not able to take advantage of those capabilities. So,
Right.
and that's also just impossible to manage.
So then the general feeling I get in listening to both of you is that people actually are saying we're not quite getting the ROI that we expected from this, and they're exploring lots of new ways to try to recapture some of the expected return on investment. It seems like the world is still very far from a cloud-native applications-oriented world and needs to get from wherever we are now, this kind of hybrid legacy mindset and practice, to a microservices-driven model. I mean, this is not to suggest that microservices are the answer for every problem, but fundamentally, applications need to be written to more modern cloud architectures and become more self-operating and all of the rest of that stuff that the bleeding edge endorses.
Yeah, and one of the problems with that is that it's cloud native is a moving target. I mean, I get paid to keep track of cloud native, and I honestly, this is one of the main things I do, and I can't keep track of all these projects. I mean, look at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation diagram of all the different projects, and it's just, wow. I can't even name all those projects. And I mean, I can probably name the most important ones, but what's going to be the most important, what's going to be like the next hot thing in Fabric or secure? I don't know at this point, because there's a whole lot of competition going on. There's an enormous amount of change. I mean, how can you have best practices when the software that you're considering using isn't even hit final? It's still beta. I mean, not just beta and usable. I mean, I'm beta and it will bust on you at times, but you know it's going to be the future. But it's
or that software was written by one individual in his garage and has made it open source, and it might be a great piece of software, but nobody is making it, moving it along. Tech companies are using it as the core of their offering.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, that's usually really smaller bits of code, like the famous cartoon, the one guy in South Dakota in his garage that everyone depends on, which is both funny and also scary as hell, because that's true. It's not really an exaggeration at all. But even say, like, I'm blanking on the name of the company, Slim AI, small company doing some really interesting work on security with a different mindset about how to secure containers. But it's still beta. It's still a small team. I think they're on their round A of funding. So I think there's a reasonable chance they're going to be a difference maker. I also think there's a reasonable chance, though, that other ChainGuard comes to mind, who also have their own take on how to secure containers and so on. And which of them is going to win out, I don't know. Only the future will tell, but both of them are very interesting approaches to securing containers. Both of them have a lot of promise. I really look forward to seeing how that all is going to work out. But if I'm having to decide today, what am I going to do? I probably would just continue to build containers off Alpine Linux myself, but I mean, at least Alpine, it's got a track record for for our world anyway, where it's
There it
only
is,
3 years
just one
old.
guy living in Michigan.
It.
That actually raises a really interesting question. You're talking about AI and AI type based companies.
Oh wow!
There's a plethora of them starting to crop up, all
Right.
doing one or two unique things.
Right.
I mean, I have a certain fascination with the idea of operational AI or ops AI ops. But I'm also like, again, everybody is doing or saying they're going to do something, but everybody seems to be in a mode where they're learning at this point.
Right.
Do you think we're going to see anything practical in that space anytime soon?
I think we will see practical programs, but what I see is very much vertical kind of things. Like I think that we will have self-driving cars. I really think that that is going to happen by the end of the decade, anyway. Sorry, Elon, but I mean, we still have a lot of work to do there. But there's enough resources, enough money being put into that area, enough models, and frankly, though making a car drive itself automatically with a bunch of other cars out there that are not driving automatically, well, that's a tough problem. It's a definable problem. It's but if you're talking about, say, anything to do with how people react to each other and say, social networking, what's the word I want? Not censorship, but monitoring, because that's a miserable job for humans and it's not working out well. It would be great if we had a machine learning model that could pick up and really spot people who are doing fake news or doing whatever it is that you don't want on your social network. But we're nowhere close to that. The models, there are I'm blanking on the name of the company, but there's a company working on labeling in machine learning, and labeling not in the sense of labeling this process or that process, but trying to identify prejudice and trying to be able to spot it and give that concept a label. And but it's proving, as you would guess, very difficult to pin down. And this is a step in that direction, but we're not there yet. I think individually we're going to see some really great stuff coming along, but I don't see any, what's the word I want? I don't see a sea change happening with AI machine learning that's going to transform the world. There's a lot of conversation now about how machine learning and AI might change programming, that we won't have to have developers anymore. And my reaction to that is, okay, you're still going to be able to have to let this AI with this machine learning database behind it decide on something. You still need to describe the problem in such a way, in such detail, that it's able to actually solve the problem you're working on. Now, what do you call it when you figured out what a problem is and you write down the
Describe it in a very detailed way.
Why that's a
Step
problem.
by step, you might even say.
Well, yes,
There's a whole world of product managers out there who might argue with that, but yes.
it's still a program. You're still going to have programs for at least another generation, probably two. Sorry.
Yeah, I think we're at the stage with AI. I mean, I personally see it. It's still at the stage of glorified automation rather than actual artificial intelligence at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like DevOps certainly transformed how we did system administration, but we're not, as AI is to say programming, it's nothing close to where DevOps has transformed system administration. It's just, we're not, and that's really just a lot of automation using a lot of different languages. Again, can't avoid the languages, even if you do make it, quote, easier. And I just don't see that. I just don't see any. It'll get lots of ink. I'll get to write about it some, but I don't see it transforming the world the way a lot of people do.
Okay, it's interesting. Well, we'll watch the space and see what happens.
Oh yeah, it'll be entertaining.
Yes, for sure. If nothing else.
It may end up, however, transforming many lives. I have been looking at the work that people have done around DALL-E. My brother is an artist and teaches at the Rhode Island School of Design. Has been tasked with coming up with an institutional response to large language models and their use in imagery generation. And that's a thorny problem. A lot of artists are, in a practical sense, likely to have their work significantly changed and impacted, by that kind of AI. All the truck drivers in America, truck driving is the number one job reported, by Americans as the job they have. Self-driving trucks are absolutely going to change that. So there will be, the future will be here before we think, just not evenly distributed.
Well, it is here in many ways. I mean, just your artistic example. 10 years ago, a photographer, 20, even 50 years ago, a photographer was retouching things using paint and masks. Today, 10, 15 years ago, they were using Adobe and, doing things manually with a little brush. Today, they load a picture and say, remove the red eye, change the background, and they just pick up the buttons, and suddenly they've got these perfect images.
In the second that you did that, some sort of shadow came across. Yes,
the lights keep flicking on and off.
I'm gonna leave that. I'm gonna leave that in. We're not editing that out. It was word from above.
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting point, though, John. If I might address a little, because I didn't see WALL-E coming that would make such a difference. Of course, you had that guy in Colorado who won the prize, and that really kicked the conversation off. And then WALL-E, because he wasn't using WALL-E, I forget what he was using, some other program of that sort. But yeah, it is going to be a transformative experience, and I'll be very interested in seeing how that goes. As far as truck driving, though, truck driving is also, well, it's a very common job. It's also a job that's aging out. The average age of truck drivers is really quite up there. I think, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but it's well into the 50s. So I expect that will certainly transform things, but I don't see it transforming the job market that much, because there doesn't seem to be that many younger people becoming truck drivers. Art, though, that is going to be interesting. Of course, I'm old enough to remember when just the idea of Photoshop, just using Photoshop was just, oh, you can't do that. I mean, how can you be a true photographer if you manipulate your image? And now there are a few photographers out there who don't use it, but they're darn few.
So I think we've exercised some of these questions. We've identified some of these pain points. Can we, in a final couple of minutes, enumerate some ways forward? Where is the low-hanging fruit in helping people get to the next step towards better ROI, being able to spend more time developing applications, less time worrying about what's under the line in platforms and infrastructure, but without relinquishing control, at the same time, which I think, people are have rational objections to, as well as perhaps legacy, objections. What are things that we need to do industry-wide to innovate?
I think they have to learn to let go of control to a bit. You really need to, unless your business is being, okay, software is eating everything. We know that. But there are many businesses you don't have to, you should worry about that part of it. Like, I don't know. If you're a widget maker, worry about widget software that will make your widgets more speedily come out of the factory or what have you. Oh, that was awkward, but I think you get the idea.
I'm sorry, I started with the widget thing earlier.
Yeah, well, I like widgets. It's a great word. But
Spacely sprockets.
space, there you go. Spacely sprockets. Oh, I like that. I'll try to remember that to use it as an example soon. I mean, the Jetsons did just turn 60, I think, the other day. That was a scary thought.
But they look marvelous.
They do. They really do. It's amazing what being made out of ink will do for you. Anyway, but okay, so yeah, focus on the software part that you actually care about. Otherwise, find the expertise you need outside yourself. If you're Spacely Sprockets, you really don't need to be cloud experts. You certainly don't need to be Kubernetes experts, but find a partner who can do that for you, or at the very least, find someone who you will buy the entire stack from start to finish. Let them worry about that part. Take a deep breath. You can't do everything. Worry about what's good for your business, what will work well for you in the long run, and find the expertise you need outside and use that expertise. That will save you a lot of wear and tear on your nerves, and it will also, in the end, save you a lot of money.
Yeah, spend some money up front to save you money in the longer term.
Yeah.
But, really focusing on what you should be doing.
Right.
Let experts handle the rest. We're going to get a better economy of scale that way, no matter how you look at it.
Right. Yep.
And I guess that's all she wrote. That's our show for today. A huge debt of thanks to Stephen J. Vaughan-Nichols for joining us. Thank you, Shaun O'Meara. And, of course, thanks also to our colleagues, producer Nika, and to Luis and DJ on social and video. We're available in podcast format on all the major platforms, and you can also join us live every other Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern through the Mirantis LinkedIn page. Thanks to you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Ta.
Thank you.